Have you wrestled with imposter syndrome, excessive and unsubstantiated self-doubt coupled with an uncanny lack of confidence? I'm your host, Betty Danowitz. Listen as I interview highly successful individuals about their experience with this imposter syndrome and how it manifests itself in their lives in this If You Ask Betty podcast series dealing with imposter syndrome. Hi, Judy. Thanks for being on the
Hi,
podcast.
Betty. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Judy, tell us about you.
So I'm going to just keep this on the professional level because there are a lot of answers to that question. We're just talking about how you get all of it, whether you want it or not. We'll keep it professional. I was an instructional designer for about 25 years. And in the last couple of years throughout my instructional design career, I have done a lot of things focusing on usability, accessibility, and DEI. And a few years ago, really started to transition to just doing that. And that's primarily what I'm doing now. So I'm helping individuals, but mostly helping organizations become more neuro-inclusive in terms of their accessibility, in terms of their DEI. Neurodivergence can really use a lot of systemic change in a lot of areas.
Mm-hmm. What would you say are your biggest accomplishments in work and in life?
So I'll start in life. I think that this was a really, really hard question to answer. In life, I think that it was becoming the parent that my kids really needed. And that's not becoming a parent. That's not, giving birth, not the same thing at all. But it was very much part of my journey toward learning about neurodivergence, my sort of fight to change the systems that we live and work in. And it just required me to become a different person in so many ways. And I'm not saying that journey is over by a long stretch. I don't think any parent ever feels like they really are who they want to be as a parent. But it's been a really, really interesting journey for me and my kids. So I think that's one of the biggest things for me in my personal life. In work, probably surviving the last couple of years. They've been life-changing for me, obviously career-changing. And I had to deal with a lot of autistic burnout, do a lot of healing, do a lot of, revitalizing on the way to, figuring out my new career. And so that was very much a journey.
Yeah. What would others say about you? If I asked them that same question, what are Judy's biggest accomplishments? What would others say?
I have no idea. I think people would say a lot of things about me if you just said, tell me about Judy, but I don't know if you made it about accomplishments. I really have no idea. I'm kind of always telling people this. I have a very typical sort of autistic lack of understanding of what other people think sometimes. There are blind spots, even though I work at it, even though I care deeply in some ways. And so I don't really know. I couldn't really tell you.
Well, I could say something. I could say that you are a kick-ass karaoke singer that has no fear. Because when we did the karaoke, what was it? The private karaoke room that will live in infamy forever. My goodness, that was a good time. And you left early. And people just kept coming.
I had another karaoke party to hit that night.
I understand. Yeah. Although you missed out, you really missed. We had so much fun.
I believe you. I'm sure that party only got better.
The bougiest, most expensive karaoke ever, but it was worth every penny. But okay, so I would say, because you got up and you sang the first song. I think you were like, I'm in. I'm doing the first song, and then you did another one before you left. And so that I could say that about you for sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Fearless.
I think it's
Hmm.
really weird because like my trademark karaoke song is I don't give a damn about my reputation, right? The Joan Jett,
Great song.
which is my trademark vibe in a lot of ways, but at the same time, having this autistic struggle to know how I'm perceived makes me care
Mm,
a little bit more. Not in the sense, I
sure.
mean, Joan Jett is singing like I about shrugging off societal expectations, which I'm totally, totally for. But at the same time, I have to care because I have to pay extra attention to it. So it's weird. But
Yeah.
yes, thank you. I am still doing a ton of karaoke here in Portland. It's a great, great karaoke town.
As you should. As you should. Okay. Well, all right. And I also want to point out too that you are an established conference speaker. You have a fantastic following on LinkedIn, who we missed you last year, by the
Thanks.
way. We noticed that you were resting and that was
Thanks.
okay. And yeah, so and I know that when I say your name, people light up in the room. So I know that you
Aw.
have this sort of charisma that people appreciate and enjoy. So with saying all that, what has been your experience with imposter syndrome?
Okay, so first of all, thank you. That was really sweet. Thank you for the kind words. I'm gonna take a second.
Mm-hmm.
There are two things when we started talking about doing this. There were two things that came to mind immediately, and I'm going to tell everybody I listened to Hadia's episode before this. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I'm going to revisit some of the themes that she brought up, and because I think that when you're a person with less privilege, imposter syndrome is never just imposter syndrome. It
Mm,
is also a reflection on all of the messages that you've been given in a variety of ways.
mm-hmm.
So there were two things that really came to my mind immediately that I wanted to talk about. The first was when I first started doing like the speaking and writing more on a national level, like for the Guild, for ATD, participating in like Twitter chats and really kind of getting out there. And it was because I could see sort of this big blind spot within our industry that
Mm-hmm.
because I kept up with tech stuff that was happening in the tech world, I could see that everybody was talking about it. Nobody was talking about HTML5 within our industry. Almost nobody.
Mm,
Very quickly, I connected with Chad Udell, Nick Floro. They were definitely some of the pioneers as well. But I started thinking, okay, I got to write about this. I got to talk about this because our products are so based around Flash. We're going to be blindsided, and we just about were within a year or two. But being a woman and deciding you're going to start writing on the internet about technology is
mm.
very, very daunting. And
Uh-huh.
I wanted to say that this was right on the heels of Gamergate, and it wasn't. It was a little bit before, but that same kind of thing was happening because I just looked it up online. It's like, this is not right. This can't be right. But I guess it was a little bit before, but that same kind of thing was happening a lot. That and you just know, like, even if there isn't some current big thing going on, growing up as a girl or as a woman, that you are always going to carry the weight of speaking for your people.
Mm-hmm.
Because and it gets communicated to you in all sorts of ways that like if your parents are driving or somebody you're driving with somebody and somebody is driving badly, if they can tell it's a man, it's just, oh, they're a jerk. But if it's a woman driver, that'll be followed by, oh, women drivers, and
Mm,
you get this communicated all your life that if you are part of a group with less privilege, whenever you do something badly, it not only reflects on you as an individual, but it also reflects on your team, your group. And so I researched and I prepped and I went over every detail and I asked people to review things and, just absolutely tried to make that first article that I put out into the world as airtight as I possibly could.
mm-hmm.
And I stressed over that like nothing I have ever written or spoken about ever in my life, because of that extra weight of,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that you sort of have to represent. Um, so that was the first thing. I'm sure that I've had imposter syndrome before in my life, but that was now about 13 or 14 years ago. But that was the first thing that came to my mind where I felt the weight, like truly very, big time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have great words. And
That works. I
the
know what
other
big
thing,
time means,
yeah,
so that works.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, hopefully I'm not leaving you all in the dust with the vocabulary. Um, the other thing that the other thing that came up for me was, well, a lot more recent, and I think that it's something that a lot of autistics and other neurodivergents can relate to. I am a late diagnosed neurodivergent. I actually just celebrated my 5-year diagnosis date for autism, and then ADHD was not that far behind within a
Mm.
year or two. And I think that when you grow up not knowing that you have a particular kind of neurodivergence, you do a lot of masking. You do
Mm.
a
Mhm.
whole lot of, self-reflection and examination. And I think especially if you fall into a category that most people would not associate with that neurotype, that you constantly question yourself for a while.
Mhm.
Even if you have a quote unquote official diagnosis, that you can spend a lot of time saying, am I really autistic? Am I ADHD? Or am I just, lazy, a loser, blah, 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 a lot of
Yeah.
other things that
Gen
you can
X.
kind of call
Yeah.
yourself. Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Also true. Um,
Mhm.
but, um, and when I say that, like, if you're in a category that most people don't associate with autism, that can be being a girl or woman. That's why a lot of us are late diagnosed. Is that they're, back in when kids were getting diagnosed, that, you know there were a lot of reasons that girls weren't. Same with people of color, by the way. And it's not considered something that, applies in a lot of ways to
Mm.
women.
Mhm.
But another thing is the outgoing karaoke singing autistic. Like, people have a certain picture of what autism is, and it's good at math, it's introverted, socially awkward, and
It's
they really
Sheldon.
struggle. It's
It's
Sheldon. Oh my
it's
gosh.
Sheldon.
Yeah, totally. I actually just binged Big Bang Theory. I had some issues watching it years ago, and somebody told me if I was teaching about autistics and autistic culture a lot, I really just needed to do this. And so I have started incorporating examples from Sheldon
That's
into
awesome.
my training sessions, and it just keeps giving. He's such a wonderful character to teach about.
Agreed.
Anyway, so
Agreed.
yeah, but if you're not that person, or if people don't see you have meltdowns or whatever, then it's easy for people to not believe that you are autistic. And I know that there are people in my life, colleagues even, who don't believe that I am. And I, don't know what to say about that. I think that there's a lot of
Yeah.
misunderstanding about what it is.
I totally agree with you. And I could see how, being diagnosed late, you would think it would sort of give you a level of peace about certain things in your life that you've felt were unfinished or undone and ununderstood, not understood. I don't know where that word came from. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but but at the same time, it could also give you a lot more questions, right? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, a lot
And
more
grief.
questions.
Yes, and all of
Hmm.
those things. Yes, and
Yeah,
grief and lots of processing, and there can be relief, and there can be um, more questioning. Even you're right.
more
You're very
questions. Yeah.
correct. Mhm.
So when you're having an episode of imposter syndrome, how does it manifest itself for you? And I ask this because, like, for some people it's perfectionism, which you kind of described earlier about wanting it to be the best possible article, or some people it's overachieving or self-sabotage. Like, what do you experience? What happens for you?
For me, there's a lot of not wanting to put myself out in the world, which is very difficult for somebody who is, running their own business, and it's, just a just me operation. That's to be fair, that's probably a lot of why I disappeared a lot last year. Um, there
Hmm.
was burnout for sure, but there was also, you know, an over focus on those voices in my life, that didn't believe what I was doing, either from the
Mm-hmm.
perspective of not believing that I was autistic, or not believing I was an expert enough to help other people and help organizations. And again, I think that's a lot of that is based on a misunderstanding of what I'm actually doing. But it just makes it very hard for me to put myself out there. And that is usually very hard for a lot of neurodivergents anyway. Even if you're the, charismatic ADHD person, if you're the extroverted autistic, or the one that uses their, lack of, caring about social hierarchy to become a good public speaker, or a great karaoke person, or whatever, that even still, it can make it really hard for you to put yourself out there. So that is something that I try to sort of actively avoid. And if I'm having, if I have a failure in my life, in my career, or whatever, I know that might be, the demon that is lurking behind that door. Oh, by the way,
Sure.
Speaking of demons, I didn't mean to do this, but we were also talking about like Hadia's like demon on your shoulder or whatever. I don't know if anybody has talked about this guy in the rest of the series, because I haven't listened to the rest of them, but there's this great little graphic novel about the imposter syndrome monster. I can't even remember what it's called now. I had imposter syndrome about even bringing this up because I couldn't remember what it was called or who wrote it or anything, but it came with this awesome plushie, and he kind of sits on my desk.
I love it.
He's the imposter monster or something, or demon. I don't know.
The session that I do around imposter syndrome, and part of the reason I do these is because I talk about the imposter monster. It's not my graphic novel. Not my graphic novel.
But you know about it.
But like further proof that multiple people can have the same idea. Nobody stole that. No one stole that idea. Let's just make sure that's very clear.
No, I didn't come up with it, but I'm glad you know, because I almost think, because I can't find my novel now, and I almost feel like, does this really exist? So, okay, good. Glad you know about it.
Did I dream that?
Yeah, right. I have the plushie.
You're having imposter syndrome about your imposter monster?
It's very meta.
That is very
meta.
Very, what is that? What was that? Inception? Very Inception.
Yes.
Ugh. Anyways, okay. So, hiding sounds like you experience like the hiding. It's not even masking. It's just, I'm just going to, it's like that. It's that meme with Homer as he like disappears into the bush.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That, or covers overhead. Just, I do not wish to be perceived.
Yes. Yeah. I'm invisible. What happens if you can't go invisible? What's the
I cancel,
next step?
Whatever. I don't know.
I cancel?
We're laughing because I've canceled on this podcast, but for very good reasons. Okay. They were legit.
Oh, yes,
I'm just saying.
Absolutely.
Right. No. I've been a performer or a presenter, or, and there's a lot of similarity,
very
or
much so.
Something like that, in some way, almost my whole life. And I think I lean on those sorts of skills a lot. I don't know if this is kind of getting too ahead to other things other questions that you've planned, but I think that some of the training I have in terms of being a speaker and a singer and all of that help with imposter syndrome. Things like taking the focus off of your focus on your performance and thinking about your audience instead, thinking about who you're there to help or entertain, who you're there for. And it's not ultimately you. It shouldn't be you. For me, that's just as a very sort of externally motivated person, as a person who wants to do a lot to help others and community and, everything like that. That's very powerful for me. I have to show up. I have to get on that stage or whatever, because there's somebody there who, wants to make their workplace more neuro-inclusive, or there's somebody who, is looking to learn about usability, whatever it is. And I have to be there for them. And when I think about them and their needs and how I can help them, it takes away that focus on myself that I think is at the root of imposter syndrome for me, as well as, stage fright and all of those things. It's very similar to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I could totally see that. There's definitely a performance aspect in what we do. There has to be, right? We have to have been trained in some way, if nothing else than just by pure repetition, that there's a performance. Otherwise, when we're having a bad day, we couldn't get up and deliver the same talk that we've always delivered. there's almost like a sixth sense that has to kick in. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you another thing. It's something that I've actually dealt with in therapy before because, like I said, I have had people, especially, this didn't start out being a career change for me. It started out by being, I'm an instructional designer and I'm going to start focusing a little bit on accessibility for neurodivergence. This is like a new accessibility topic that I'm not seeing much about that I think is really important that I started putting out there. And when I did, I did get a little bit of pushback. I did get a little, oh, you're not really autistic and, whatever. And that shut me up for a while. And I actually talked to a therapist. I had a wonderful, wonderful therapist. And we actually wrote an affirmation. And I don't always go back and read it. It's the kind of thing that you have to write for yourself when you're feeling it, because you can't possibly write it for yourself when you're in the, in the moment. It's the rope when you're in the pit. You can't build yourself a rope at that point. But the one thing that I will always remember from it, or at least remind myself, is her pointing out to me that when somebody with less privilege faces and fights their imposter syndrome, that is an anti-patriarchal, anti-capitalist effort. And that's something that was really meaningful to me. Because if somebody is saying, oh, you're not really autistic, that's an ableist perspective coming from their own limited understanding. If somebody is saying, that women don't deserve to write about tech, or women don't know anything about tech, that's a sexist perspective. And fighting that is, something that's extremely important to me. So I have to remember that it is, and use that to sort of get over myself. Even if I don't, look up the entire affirmation, that nugget is always with me.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a smart lady. You should hang on to her. I'm assuming it was a lady. I should have.
Yes. Yeah. She,
okay.
I'm
you
sorry,
did
you
say
might have
she.
to cut this
so,
out.
okay. I feel better.
She actually died last year. So that was part of my bad year. No, it's okay. We're going to cut this, right? I would love to. I would love to have. Yes, it's okay. We're good. I had a friend who had one of the best responses when I told him my therapist had died. He was like, "That's a complicated kind of grief." I was like, "Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, it's big, right?" So yeah. I'm so sorry. I wasn't going to say that, but then you were like,
"I was just trying to compliment the lady." Okay.
She deserves it all. She deserves it all.
We're gonna come on back now. All right. Okay.
Please don't cut that. That was marvelous.
It really was. We're just gonna leave it. Okay.
All right. Of course we are. You always say that you're gonna cut my authentic moments.
It's so good though. It's so good.
Thank you.
So when you think about how imposter syndrome manifests itself in your life, are there other contributing factors? So we've definitely talked in previous episodes about common triggers. Something is new, there's a new set of expectations. I know for you, it's your diagnosis of autism and ADHD, but is there anything else about you that you feel makes this imposter syndrome phenomenon happen, or makes it worse, or makes it more often? Is there anything else that affects it?
That's kind of what I was planning to talk about the other country, is the intersectionality of all of the ways that, you can be not supported. And I want to tell you though that that's pretty much it. But I want to highlight the article that Hadia mentioned in her episode. It's called something like Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And it was so fantastic. And it just really highlights how so much of this is not imposter syndrome. It's inadequate systemic supports and on the other hand, systemic barriers that are happening. I saw a meme or tweet or something. I get all my wisdom from memes, whatever. And I saw a great one the other day that had that said something like, stop telling people they need self-care when what they really need is community care. And I loved that. I loved that because imposter syndrome is definitely real. But so often the people that it affects are being, force fed all of this, societal
Sure.
programming that makes it worse. And focusing on imposter syndrome also can have the effect of making it an individual problem when really what we need is better systemic support or just lack of barriers. Just let us go.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think though that just to, I'm going to say yes, and you said
Oh,
that earlier.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, and that the systemic problems that we have, the systemic barriers that are there, make us feel or cause us to have emotions that make us feel the way that we feel when we have imposter syndrome. And
Absolutely.
even though those systemic barriers might not even be real, they might be assumed constraints, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our feelings still are.
Oh,
Like we
100%.
Yeah, so totally agree with you, and that's actually what I was looking for in that question, right? Is what else do you feel sort of makes this happen? And that's a great answer. I think, you know, Judy, you got a lot of that things coming at you. Like we're glad you showed up today because like seriously,
Finally.
sorry, as I make her spit out her Coke. Sorry about that. But like all these things and that all these like these systemic things, but then also like, I mean, you've got some challenges. And that's one of the things that one of the reasons I was very excited that you said, yes, you wanted to be a part of this was because I think that there are others out there like you facing really, sometimes some days, really tough hills to climb. And when they can see and hear how you are overcoming that on a regular basis, that's going to help them feel less alone and more empowered um, to continue to overcome. Because imposter syndrome, as we've learned, it's not something that's curable. It's something that we have to learn how to cope with, and what are the things that we need to do for us to help make it bearable so we can move through it. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm so glad that you came and shared your story. Anything else that you want to
Well,
add
Well,
on? Yeah,
that's
go
what
ahead.
that's what the like that's the flipping it to I have to do this for other people that I might help. So I appreciate you saying that because that kind of fueled um all of the that that's the reason that I do what I do and in such a public way. That's what, makes that's what made it to where I had to, when I was talking about neurodivergence, when I decided to start talking about neurodivergence, that's what made it to where I had to talk about it from my own perspective and from the perspective of the communities that I'm in, not just as
Mm-hmm.
this is what the research says, but talking about it from an authentic perspective, nothing about us
Mm-hmm.
without us, right? But also to be able to give a face to that, and to maybe help people a little bit more through that process.
Yeah.
Um, I really appreciate, by the way, that you asked. I know one of the questions we were talking about is why did you want to be a part of this? But you asked me,
Yeah.
which I have to admit, I had a moment of like, what do you mean? What do you mean you want me to talk? Who says I have imposter syndrome, Betty? Speaking of Big Bang Theory, by the way, there's this great moment in the show later when they're kind of going through the whole Nobel Prize thing,
Yeah.
where these competitors for the Nobel Prize are saying, "Oh, we have imposter syndrome," and Amy,
One of my
the
favorite
character Amy,
scenes.
says, "You don't have
She
imposter syndrome. You're an imposter. There's a difference."
she
Because
loses
they,
her shit. It's amazing.
right,
It's the
right, one of the
first time you see Maya
right,
Bialik lose her shit.
right.
And she's like, you can't have imposter syndrome because you're an imposter and you're a fraud. And I'm like,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you've watched it more than
it's
I have for sure.
fantastic. Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah, I
yeah.
don't think that we ever see her like just go off
No.
like that before. And anyway, it was a really powerful moment. It's a really, I don't know what to do with that. You already had a great conversation with Hadia about like how do you know the difference between being an imposter or just like accurately knowing that you're not good enough and having imposter syndrome. I don't know that there's a great formula for that, but thank you for like inviting me to talk about that because in a way it kind of made me feel like
Uh-huh.
um, I'm validated in having imposter syndrome as opposed to actually being an imposter, which is of course the thing that you always feel like you are.
Right. But if you're an imposter, if you don't, I always say it this way, if you don't have imposter syndrome, you might be an imposter. It's not 100% for sure.
Of
Right.
course, of
But you
course.
might be an imposter. But
You might.
typically, imposters they don't feel like they know they're lying. They know they're
Yeah.
not qualified.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's not a question for them. They
Right.
like in the Big Bang Theory, they knew
Right.
they
He
weren't
knew.
qualified.
Right. Right.
Both of them did. They just wanted the $1 million prize. So
Right. And
they
they
knew
said
they
they had
weren't qualified.
imposter syndrome as a way of seeming more real. It's all very meta, right?
It was.
It's all weird.
You're like watching. You're
There's
like,
another
whoa.
there's another meme or tweet or something. I'll send these so that we can link them up or something like that to give
Yeah.
credit where it's due. But I have I might have it stuck to my monitor or something like that that
Maybe.
basically says something like if your work has been validated in multiple spaces, stop thinking that you're an imposter because like you can see the evidence of your impact all
Yes.
around you. Yeah.
Yes. And that's the clincher, right? Is that imposter syndrome is feeling like you're not qualified even when the evidence supports the contrary. And like if we go back to that scene from Big Bang, there was no evidence that they were qualified at all.
Right. Right.
And so they didn't have imposter syndrome, they were imposters. She was totally right.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought that up. We watched that show way too much, and I'm not even sorry. Not sorry.
Yeah. I binged it in like a month, maybe 6 weeks, like all 12
that's a lot of
seasons.
episodes.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah.
That's 200, almost 300 episodes.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think
they're
so.
short though. They're
whatever you got to say to make yourself feel better, Judy.
I felt really bad that I hadn't gone through it all before because it's such an important part of neurodivergent culture. I'm going to take that as opposed to just autistic, by the way. Sheldon is not canon autistic, although he's widely believed to be, but he is clearly neurodivergent. He is canon OCD, which is a type of neurodivergence. And there are clearly lots of other neurodivergence on the show as well. So it was a great study.
Sure.
I think I'm about to do a re-binge because I've pulled some like great examples that I love to use in my trainings, but I think there's still so much more there. And so much about like the interplay of and communication styles and interaction styles between neurodivergent and neurotypical. There's so much great stuff there.
And if you follow his relationship with Penny, she starts by being just overly annoyed with him. Like, what is wrong with him? She actually says that a few times. And and Leonard's like, we're not really sure.
Yeah, right.
And at the time when this show came out, you didn't know we were going to talk about the Big Bang Theory. At the time when this show came out, like neurodivergence wasn't a word we used.
No.
It just wasn't. And in fact, autism wasn't really a word that we used very often at the time. Yeah. ADHD was still sort of seen as a bit of a faux pas, not a Gen X quality. Sorry.
Right.
Just going to put it out there. I often think that most of our generation is ADHD either because we were born that way or because we were raised by somebody who was undiagnosed ADHD. So we have picked up their habits.
I'm just going to put out that the overlap in traits between ADHD and trauma is very significant. I'm just going to put that out there.
That's true. And that equals, I see why you said that, because I said Gen X, and Gen X is full of trauma.
I'm just, seriously, I never made this connection, but people have said that in my classes before. Like, how do I know if I'm not, how do I know if I'm ADHD or not just like Gen X? And I had to think about that for a second. I was like, what? But who knows? Who knows? I think, although
that's another podcast, I think
this there's a lot of great stuff, right? Neurodivergence does include trauma, and the smart organizations are thinking about that too, because what have we just been through in the last 5 years? Everybody. Yeah. And,
absolutely.
And we're just having to keep on. And we're going through more and more every day, so it's something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we did great though. That's all right. I am so glad that you shared your experience. Thank you so much, Judy Katz, for sharing your experience with us. Thanks to the listeners. I hope that you will continue with this series to hear more stories about dealing with imposter syndrome. So many amazing people deal with this every day, and sharing their story helps them and you feel less alone. So be sure to follow If You Ask Betty on LinkedIn or YouTube for more episodes and resources. Oh, and tell your friends about it. Hit that share button so that they also know that they're not alone. Peace out.